let's move on to this. So this is something that happened last week. The SEC stepping in their own shit. Stop me if you've heard this story before, but a very interesting thing that came out last week. So the SEC settled with eToro for crypto sales for $1.5 million, which is a pretty paltry amount. Richard Hart tweeted not long after it because he realized the fact that the SEC is continuing to pick winners and losers, which is what they've done. You know, when they want to file lawsuits against people, it's kind of like sling a bunch of shit at the wall and see what sticks. And then also, maybe I won't go after these guys. Maybe I will go after these guys. It depends on who I want to shake down for money or not, really. That's kind of how the SEC rolls. And we'll look at Richard Hart's tweet. Appreciate the super chat, DJ Moon Boy. We will get there in just a second. Appreciate you for sure. Let's look at Richard's tweet. So I think you've got it up there. So in response to this, and we have a couple, this is really good because this actually affects the corrupt SEC lawsuit against Richard Hart as well. So we're going to get into that because Nuclear Herbs, famous Pulse Chain community attorney, retired, had some thoughts on this as well. So Richard said, did the SEC just choose ETH, BTC, and BCH as winners? Did they just choose technology for you? How's forcing the sale of some things for other things and removing markets helping create fair, orderly, or efficient markets? The SEC just announced a settlement with a company. They'll pay a $1.5 million fine and delist, send back to users, and after 187 days, sell all the coins, unless they are Ethereum, Bitcoin, or Bitcoin Cash. They don't say in the press release or the cease and desist which the other coins are. Why don't they say what the other coins are? I'm not a lawyer, and this is not advice. Here's some random thoughts. The DEA could pretend coins are drugs and arrest everyone for drugs. The ATF could pretend coins are guns and arrest everyone for guns. The SEC could pretend coins are securities. Okay, this is longer than I thought. I've been told that the SEC isn't supposed to choose winners and losers, and that they're not supposed to do malicious prosecution, that they're technology neutral, that they facilitate capital formation. I believe they might also take oaths to uphold the Constitution, which it seems they might want to upload it somewhere too. They might not understand what the Constitution guarantees us in right to association, speech, assembly, contract, equal protection as blockchain speakers. Other random thoughts: arbitrary and capricious, void for vagueness, fair notice, taking for regulatory taking. Apparently, the government isn't allowed to just take your things or their value without just compensation. Anyway, the SEC published the cease and desist in a press release on the settlement. I don't actually see the real settlement document, so who knows? Blah, 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 blah. Maybe the SEC will be more clear and point out specifically which coins they're calling certain crypto assets as securities. That's going to be the main sticking point, that phrase here, crypto asset securities, in their press release. Maybe it's arbitrary, maybe it's capricious. Also, I've never liked eToro because the majority of people that use them lose money, or at least they say they did at the top of their own homepage, which said something like 65% of users of the service lose money. Now I think it says something weaker. I'm not a fan of trading in general. So the point is the SEC kind of going back against what they have talked about in the past, using the phrase certain crypto assets as securities, and then they basically choose which ones are okay and which ones aren't here, and settling in this lawsuit. So before we look at the Nuclear Herb stuff, because again, this actually directly spills over into the lawsuit against Richard Hart because they use that terminology in their complaint. But what do you think about RH's stuff here about the eToro and SEC thing?
Well, you know, he's always been anti eToro. It's been one of the things, if you listen to his old streams, he talks about it all the time, and the warning that they said 65% of people lose money using this service. And, you know, he's always said, I'm willing to bet the other 35 don't make up for near what the 65% are losing. So he's always been very against trading against these platforms. And yeah, I mean, he makes a great point about how they aren't supposed to even be in the position to do this, right? They're not supposed to be the prosecution. They are neutral, or so they say. So yeah, he makes a good point. And again, you know, I'm sure he's in communication with his lawyers all the time, because he does his research. I'm sure they do as well. But yeah, I mean, it's just, it's, you know, there's plenty of pages to this. It goes on and on. But yeah, how are they supposed to be deciding without letting us know first? It just doesn't again, it points out to the lack of clarity that the SEC has in general, and has always been that way. They don't want to rule on anything. They just want to. Somebody called it the other day. I forget who I was listening to, but they called it whack-a-mole prosecution. You know what I mean? It's just that's how they operate. So yeah, I completely agree with them.
And it's funny that Richard didn't, I don't know, I didn't really look into the rest of his thread there, but he didn't really bring up the fact that this terminology has actually been used in their complaint against him and his firms and companies, Pulse, PulseX, and Hex. So if you want to bring up whichever nuclear herbs tweet you want to start with, I think it might make sense for us to go to the one that says, here's the SEC in their response brief filed 2 weeks ago, the one that starts that way, if you happen to see it. You already got it? Got it. Okay. So he says, here's the SEC in their response brief filed 2 weeks ago against Richard Hart. I'm sure his lawyers have questions, given that the SEC just admitted in the eToro case the term crypto asset securities is entirely made up, and that they regret any confusion that may have caused from their use of their completely made up term. That should be fun to defend in October's hearing. So there's one thing he says. You can see he's got it highlighted in the pictures that they use that term throughout the complaint. It says defendants engaged in unregistered offers and sales of securities in the form of crypto asset securities. And another section here, crypto asset security offerings at issue here, all for the purpose of promoting the crypto asset securities. There's another occasion, 3, 4. I mean, it's all through the 27-page complaint. So you can see that if do you want to go to one of the other tweets, and then I can get your thoughts on these two, Ewok. If you want to go to the October 24th hearing, should be that one. You happen to see that? Got it. Here. Cool. All right. So should be more interesting given the SEC's latest revelation. Very curious as to how Richard's attorneys decide to address this, given that the SEC's entire complaint is built on the foundation that Hex, Pulse, and PulseX are crypto asset securities, a term that the SEC now regrets using because it causes confusion and doesn't actually mean anything. And then he has it highlighted throughout the top of the complaint right there. So again, yeah, I want to know what Richard Hart's attorneys would say about this, because they seem to be talking out of both sides of their mouth at this point. And then the final herbs tweet is the one that goes, the SEC regrets using the made-up term crypto asset security. Wasn't expecting to wake up to this. I understand this is from their latest amended complaint versus Binance. That footnote is incredible. Read it again. So they did come out and amend some things. So here's Paul Grewal. Is he from like Coinbase? Yeah. He said the SEC regrets any confusion it may have invited by it's convenient by falsely and repeatedly stating that tokens themselves are securities. This is the remarkable representation in footnote 6 of the SEC's amended complaint against Binance. I hope whoever that is getting some good sleep tonight. His head's about to explode when he wakes up and sees this. And they say, as the court noted and as the SEC reiterates with its use of the term crypto asset securities, the SEC is not referring to the crypto asset itself as a security, rather as the SEC has consistently maintained since the very first crypto asset Howey case, the SEC litigated the term as a shorthand. Okay, so they're backpedaling it and calling it a shorthand now. Yeah. While helpful as a shorthand reference, the security in this case is not simply the crypto asset, which is little more than alphanumeric cryptographic sequence. Blah blah blah. So essentially, they're trying to say that this term that they were using isn't what they actually meant, and it was just shorthand, and just forget about it all. Okay, here's they have it all zoomed in. Let's see here. Defendants appear to argue that even if the 10 crypto assets were offered and sold as securities during the ICOs, they do not remain securities in perpetuity. The SEC is not advancing this argument. The SEC's allegations with respect to the 10 crypto assets at issue in secondary markets are that their promotions and economic realities have not changed in any meaningful way under Howey, such as they continue to be offered and sold as investment contracts. So long story short, I mean, they are going back on a term that they've used for a very long time and just saying it was shorthand and, just forget about it. You guys read it wrong. It wasn't our fault, essentially. So when you kind of think of Ewok, or what do you make of?
No, totally. They're backpedaling essentially because it is very misleading, right? You hear crypto asset security, the first thing a judge or anybody is going to think is that it's already been deemed a security.
Right.
It's the first thing you think of. That's what, the normal thought process goes through. So Yeah, it's very shady, very underhanded of them, and I'm glad it came up now. It's going to make for a very interesting day in court. I think on October 24th or whatever day that is, um, because here it is, case law that they've already said, yeah, sorry, that's not really what we meant. Well, now you got to rewrite your whole complaint,
which you can't
or
do.
what you
I don't
can't
even think
do.
they can do really now.
No,
Yeah,
they can't. They can't.
yeah.
So, now it's just another point for the RH lawyers to make to the judge to say, look, these guys, this is another reason why this should probably be dismissed, because, they're calling it a security. It's not a security. Now they've gone back on their own terminology that they've been using left and right. It just doesn't make sense. So,
Mhm.
yeah. I completely agree with this. I think it's going to be a very interesting turn of events.